what are you thinking about this Epstein suicide? What's the talk over there? What's your opinion on what's going on?
I mean, there's been a lot of interest in Epstein, actually, in the UK because of his links to Robert Maxwell, to Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Robert Maxwell's daughter, and his kind of, I wouldn't say partner in crime, really. Obviously lots of connections to Britain, a very strong connection to Prince Andrew as well, who's basically an arms dealer. He goes around cutting arms deals for the British arms business, arms industry. Spends a lot of time in places like Saudi Arabia, places like that. And so the whole idea of him being linked to child sex trafficking was pretty, explosive. So there's been quite a lot of interest. Also, I've noticed, questions about the suicide. Now, was it suicide? Because it's quite clear that Epstein was saying 2 weeks before he died that he was someone was trying to kill him. So this sounds to me like a bit of a pre-warning of something fishy going on. And it's even possible, I mean, this is a real outside chance, but it's even possible that the guy is still alive somewhere and that some kind of, body double or somebody else was in the body bag, although I think that's really unlikely. Given that, the whole circumstances around this definitely don't point to suicide. They point to him being murdered to get him out of the way, basically with the line that dead men tell no tales, George.
Right. I think he knew too many top people on this side of the Atlantic and on that side. He just was, just too well connected, and he would have exploded. He would have ruined a lot of people's
the thing
lives.
Is, he was connected to the top of the top. So we're talking about
creme de la creme. Yeah.
Yeah, so that we're not talking even about, people like Donald Trump, who is not the guy in charge. We're talking about the people who are the financiers, often behind the scenes, who are running things like, hostile takeover bids for enormous multinationals that are bigger than countries. These people stay in the shadows, and Epstein was very close to a lot of them. In fact, there's one name that keeps popping up again and again, which is Leslie Wexner, who was a billionaire who was much richer than Epstein, and he kind of turned Epstein into a so-called financier. But one of the things we've heard is that although he was talked about as a sort of financial whiz kid guy, he was never seen on Wall Street. People never saw him there. He was up to other things. That money was appearing in his bank accounts and in his investment firms from, I would suggest, some sort of black operations, maybe even sort of slush funds for drug money, that sort of thing. So I mean, that was basically a front that he was a financier.
Steve, but
that was just a front operation explanation as to how he was so wealthy.
It was a front. Front. Yeah.
I think so. Certainly, yeah. I mean, okay. So if we could start by looking at some of the UK connections, obviously Ghislaine Maxwell's the most. The obvious thing to say about her is all of this investigation, indictments, arrests, charges should shift to her, because she is absolutely as implicated as he was in this child sex trafficking. In fact, it certainly looks as if she was the main procurer of young kids for him and for the effectively intelligence operation they were running, which was, this is why I say it's a front. I think the financial stuff is they were running a blackmail operation. I think that's pretty clear now. People like Philip Giraldi, former CIA guy, and Whitney Webb on Mint Press News have really pulled all this apart. They had, for example, the places in New York City and Florida, George, had cameras and microphones all over the place.
Right.
Well, worth mentioning as well that Leslie Wexner's places, his homes, had CCTV hidden everywhere. One of his bathrooms apparently was like something from James Bond.
Right.
And if you opened the one of the cupboards in one of the bathrooms, you see a whole bunch of like array of CCTV everywhere. I mean, obviously that's not the sort of thing you want to see in the bathroom or the restroom when you're using it. You know, you don't want to see CCTV everywhere.
No, right. Hey, I don't like my bathroom habits being broadcasted.
Well, it shows you where these people are coming from. They're interested in very much intruding into people that come and visit them's private lives. Yeah. And also, of course, that is potentially usable for blackmail. That's, I think, what really this is all about. This is not about powerful elite people have got some sort of predilection for this. The idea is to entrap them with young girls, film them, take pictures, that sort of thing, in order to sort of threaten them and get them to, you know, say there's some reluctance to, you know, get involved in the next war or whatever. You say, well, look, okay, if you're going to say no to this, then, you know, you're going to get the Daily Mail, the New York Post. This is going to be on the front page tomorrow. Because they'll love these pictures we've got of you.
Well, that Ghislaine was on the New York Post. She was seen at a In-N-Out hamburger place in L.A. the other day.
So why is she free, George? Why hasn't she been charged?
Well, she's the unnamed person in the indictment or something. She's not named in the indictment by name.
Well, why not? Because she's clearly been involved, and there is an absolute mountain of evidence now of witness statements saying that she has been child sex trafficking. And there's enormous amounts. I mean, even trying to get these girls to have children for her and offering to pay $200,000 a month for them to look after those children once they've had them. I mean, this is all with minors, which is what she was procuring from around the world. This is all criminal. So why is she going to burger joints? Why hasn't she been arrested? And all of those people many of those people who've made statements against Jeffrey Epstein that got him convicted previously, and this time again charged, also cite her. So why is she walking the streets, George? This is unbelievable. Her father, by the way, Robert Maxwell, who was a London Daily Mirror magnate, he was a newspaper guy in London, very powerful. His funeral was a Mossad funeral, and they had some of the Mossad chiefs there, and he was thanked for his services to the Israeli state by, you know, these intelligence chiefs at his funeral, Robert Maxwell. But that's what Ghislaine was doing, and that is simply procuring young girls for entrapment. Pretty obvious, really. The list of names, just sticking with the UK, is Prince Charles number one on the list. Like I say, an arms dealer, him being involved in child sex trafficking is explosive. It's not very nice for the Queen. And the Queen, of course, was one of the people whose private numbers were on Epstein's phone. So the Queen is giving her private numbers to child sex traffickers. What's that all about?
Well, I don't know.
And it's also worth mentioning that, I mean, the Queen has got a lot of questions to answer. She might like to turn up at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial when it happens, because she may have a few things to say. Her other son, Prince Charles, Edward apparently is not so bad, but one of her other sons, Prince Charles, he's been linked, of course, very close to Jimmy Savile, the paedophile, the worst paedophile in British history. So we've got two of Queen Elizabeth's sons linked to underage sex, perversion, and all this sort of thing. So I think the Queen has got a few questions to answer about the way she's brought these two boys up. Right,
exactly. That's why Ghislaine may be in danger right now out there in L.A. because she knows too much. Ghislaine Maxwell may be in danger now. She knows too much. Huh?
If she's got any sense, she'll be going to the press, she'll be going to the police and telling them everything she knows. Now, her best chance, as in many cases like this, when one finds oneself very close to a big story like this, is to turn what we call in the UK Queen's evidence, which is to say, right, okay, this has been exposed. I will help you, the state, the people, the government. I will help you to net all the big fish here and and in exchange for immunity from prosecution. And that's, of course, what they should be doing with her, is to be saying to building a relationship with Ghislaine. I mean, this is very much like what the British intelligence used to do in the Second World War, is they'd be friendly to the Germans they captured, and they say, well, we're going to win the war, but actually we're going to make Europe a lot better than the Hitler would have done, and so kind of let's just be friends. And this worked with many of the Nazis that were captured in the Second World War, George, is they just basically crumbled. Their whole Nazi facade disappeared. And they said, yeah, okay, you're absolutely right. And they did. They cooperated. They told the British intelligence up in Bedford everything about what they needed to know. And as a result, many of them did walk free after the war, even though they committed crimes, because what they'd done is they'd helped the authorities to net the real big fish. And that's what this should, really be about, is, the implication of people like Leslie Wexner. Potentially people should be concerned about his involvement with Epstein and start asking questions. Why did Leslie Wexner lend or give vast sums of money to Epstein and not to other people? I mean, Wexner, for example, Wexner is behind the Victoria's Secret chain, right, which is this sex clothes sort of lingerie chain throughout the world. This is the sort of thing which, may be used to give these lingerie and gifts to the girls. The whole thing, I think, is tied up with the whole idea of sexual entrapment. This is this billionaire with CCTV.
Well, now Steve Pachinik says that it was a Mossad honeypot operation.
That's right. Well, many people are saying, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. And another thing, too, is Prince Andrew was cut loose from the Florida indictment down there the first time around with Epstein. He was expunged from that whole process down there.
The most damning side of all of this is the royal connection.
Exactly.
Because the British royal family, though they kind of lurk behind the scenes, the Queen has got this very, very good public relations image in Britain,
right,
as being she doesn't say anything in public, except she does a few things which are always the right things. So she keeps a lot secret, and she's very, very good at it. The only trouble is you can't control your boys. When your boys are associating with child sex traffickers and the biggest paedophile Britain has ever seen, that does rather cast aspersions on, your secrecy and why you're being so secret. Maybe there's other stuff going on. So those are the main connections in Britain, as far as I can see, is through Ghislaine, Robert Maxwell and Prince Andrew. But also, this is really, I think, exposing some of the dark secrets of the British royal family. This is, if you actually, the secrecy is accepted by many, but let's also look at, for example, strange deaths that have taken place around Prince Charles. 2 on his estate, Highgrove in Gloucestershire, just near Bristol, actually. And, there are all sorts of, there was also the nurse who this is to the Prince William, and it's actually his wife, and this nurse committed suicide as well in a very peculiar way. Yeah. Suddenly she made the criticism and she died. So it's rather too much so-called suicide spiraling around the royal family. Yeah. The other thing is with the hanging is, well known as a Masonic sign, right? So the Freemasons always, it's used in witchcraft too, and this is a way of saying that this death is by us. So for those insiders, they will know, they will see this as a chilling reminder of what could happen to them if they say anything outside the craft, whether that craft be Freemasonry or witchcraft, George.
Right. Ole Domagard on some of these false flag operations. Well, we've got this one in El Paso. Have you been looking into that? And then the Dayton, Ohio shooting. And I think both of the shooters were on some kind of psychiatric drugs. It seems to be just given, Hey, it's
really, a lot of the people, and I think Donald Trump is 100% right to nail it as a connection to mental illness.
Right.
Because actually, the mentally ill are very easy to manipulate. We all know about the Manchurian Candidate.
Yes.
But you can use things like hypnosis basically destabilize people. You can even, I mean, this is something that's sort of plaything tool of the CIA and MI6, the intelligence services, like to play with people's minds. They like to get inside people's heads and almost implant ideas into them, get them to be easily manipulated from afar. And if you're in an unstable condition, you're very open to suggestion, and it could be that that's been involved here. Even if it isn't, though, I think we've got to take a much more robust attitude to mental health. What happens is, so often in Britain and in America, we leave people with nothing, particularly young people. We don't give them opportunities. We don't give them prospects for the develop themselves, to get careers, families, and income for the future. We're not doing that in the way we should do. Everybody should have a decent chance of a decent future, and we're not doing that. Of course, that is perfect for those that want to exploit people with mental health difficulties. That is to say, the intelligence agencies and anybody else, criminal elements, organised crime. And that, I think, is very much the case in many of these mass shootings, is people are very unstable, and those unstable people need to be cared for, whether that's by the state, by the church, but certainly they shouldn't be alienated, and they should be taken seriously, and often they are casualties of injustice in the justice system too, as we've seen with several of these people, that you'll find that something's happened in their life which has been a disaster they haven't been able to come to terms with, largely because the justice system isn't doing its job. I mean, it's too easy to buy the court process, buy the system, and that just destabilises people, George. At the end of the day, they're trying to, obviously, disarm the American public. They're trying to make sure that people don't have the ability to fight back if their government turns on them.
Yeah, it's about gun control, and they're pushing it towards the red flag types of laws here, where a neighbor or a family member could turn you in and have your guns taken from you. And that's where we're headed.
You see, this is the idea, of course, is to turn neighbours against each other. That's the whole point of this sort of law. Rather than people being organised to fight their government,
right,
or to. I mean, you have to also remember there is a massive long-term program to discredit democratic governments. So
right.
The real government in the West, the real government in the Western world, right, is the corporations, the banks, the media, the mass media, not little media like you and I, the mass media, who you never hear this kind of discussion on there, on the BBC, CNN, that discredit them. And the universities, there's also a tremendous amount of control of what is allowed to be taught in universities. They don't really like critical thinking anymore. The idea is to try and get people to believe certain views of history and that sort of thing. And so there are several of these institutions which are very, very controlled, George, and they are easily bought. This is the thing, easily bought via the banks. So the banks provide the buying power. The arms industry provides the fighting power abroad to acquire more land, to expand the empire, and those people really in charge, I think, are those. I mean, I'm not saying Leslie Wexner is, the main man, of course, but there are a lot of people who are very powerful behind the scenes, very rich and wealthy, and they believe that wealth entitles them to buy up the planet, to buy up the press, to buy up democratic governments, and to overturn them.
Right, exactly. Boy, I tell you, you're right on. The money itself, starting in the temples, you know what I mean? It really made, inroads, you know what I mean, into controlling the whole society. See? Well, yeah.
The other thing is, of course, you've got to remember that the credit system that we're going towards, the electronic money system, is actually very similar to the whole old ancient Egyptian system, which was a credit system. You never actually, any individual in ancient Egypt didn't have anything of value, of worth themselves, but the system told them what they were worth. And of course, the system can just decide, you're worth nothing today because we don't like you. If it wants to, you should be able to actually possess some wealth yourself. When the old gold standard, with the dollar on the gold standard up until the 1970s, that was a perfectly good system. Nixon kicked it off, and I was listening to a terrific talk by Michael Hudson. We had it on our show yesterday in Bristol. The former banker is terrific. I don't know if you've come across Michael, but what he's saying is that since Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971, they've been really living on borrowed time by getting the petrodollar has been kind of keeping the dollar going ever since then.
Right.
But what's now happening with Trump's trade war with China is the Chinese and the Russians particularly are not buying anywhere near as many US Treasury bonds as they used to, and instead, you know what they're doing? They're buying gold.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's bringing their own currencies effectively are starting to become the ruble and the yuan are starting to become the new gold standard that's taking over from the dollar. So the only thing that's keeping the dollar going really is Saudi Arabia and the whole petrodollar system. So that's, I think, an interesting kind of underside to Trump's China trade war. I mean, he did get elected to do it, and I try and always remind people this. When he stood for election, he said, we are going to put up tariffs to Chinese steel.
Right.
And many people would argue he's right to do that, but you've got to make sure you've got an industry in the United States. You've got enough industry so you can manufacture steel, make cars, make aeroplanes, make whatever it is you want to make. Whether it's washing machines, whether it's trains, anything. But if you haven't got the industry there in the first place, you're going to be basically, by putting up all these tariffs, you're going to be cutting off your nose to spite your face, George.
Yeah, one of the indicators that just popped up last week was the long-term bond rate dipped below the short-term rate, and that's an indication of a looming recession in the future.
Well, that's definitely the case.
One other thing I wanted to make too on this false flag thing. I just found the man's name. It's a name that it's not a very frequent or common name. Dr. Louis Joyan Jolly West. Do you know that name?
Never heard of it, never.
Anyway, look that up. He has interviewed almost every person that's been in these assassinations or mass murder or the bombing in Oklahoma. He's interviewed almost every one of those people. Sirhan, Jack Ruby, McVeigh, all those people. He gone in to their prison or their jail and interviewed them. This man right here. Now he's passed away about several years ago.
Yeah,
but he was tied in. He was tied into the MK Ultra and all this mind control stuff. Very deeply.
But events could be overtaking all this, George. This is the trouble. Is things starting to kick off in Hong Kong, aren't they? I mean, we could see Chinese troops going into Hong Kong. If so, we could be looking at a third world war. Ultimately, what are the Chinese troops going to do to those Hong Kong people?
The Chinese, they better be careful because it's an outlet to the West. And they're messing around with something that they should leave alone.
But you see, the thing, but hang on. The thing is that the China is in a position where it's made its money from the global financial system. And it may be thinking, well, we've had enough of all this international trade. We've got enough industry to fight our own corner. And we don't need to trade with the United States. We're just going to stop selling them stuff. And we don't need to trade with Europe. We can even, have a battle with them. And that could easily turn into some sort of fighting war as well. So this is the danger of these economic wars, is they can turn real. But let's just get back to Jeffrey Epstein for a minute, because there are a few other people to mention. Bill Clinton, obviously, mention him. Yeah. Clinton, very, very much involved. Clinton refused Secret Service escorts. Yeah. So this is amazing, really. He took Jeffrey Epstein's massage people instead of the Secret Service escorts on some of his international trips. So what the hell's going on there? I mean, it really looks as if these people that are being recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell and by Jeffrey Epstein are basically international spies or Mossad spies. Maybe it's the Israelis, maybe it's others, but it certainly looks like they're Israeli spies that are literally taking the place of Secret Service, US Secret Service personnel on international trips with Bill Clinton. Absolutely amazing, really. And I suppose there's also people like some of the other people involved are Netanyahu, who is very close to Epstein. Ehud Barak, Israeli Prime Minister, was also very close to him. He was also close to the ADL and B'nai B'rith, of course, and that is, these Zionist lobby organisations in the United States, and they've been going for many years, but they are still at the cutting edge, and they fund a lot of the agitation in the US and in the UK pro-Israel. So they try and make out that anyone that criticises Israel is anti-Semitic, and they're doing it because they hate Jews. But that's just nonsense. We can criticise Israeli policy. But finally, George, on Epstein, is the brilliant New York Times article about him, which talks about his links to transhumanism.
That was going to be done at his New Mexico ranch or something.
That's right. The thing is, a lot of people don't understand what trans is. Basically like a religion for the super elite. If you can imagine what Peter Thiel, Eric Schmidt, and the Bilderbergers are into, this is the stuff. Basically, they believe that you can use artificial intelligence to alter the human DNA, and that their kids are going to live forever if they have it done. So they'll be paying millions, if not billions, of their spare dollars into these research grants, which actually I don't think they're ever going to get anywhere. But this is the trouble with these people. They don't make a big fuss about it, but they don't believe in God necessarily, or anybody else, or anything else, but they do believe in something. And this is one of the things I think is fascinating about getting into the mind of these elitist psychos. You could say some of them are psychos, some of them probably aren't. But the things they believe, George, are really pernicious, actually, because what they're doing is they're saying, well, we can alter our DNA to turn ourselves. Yeah. We won't just be a financial elite. We will be an elite species. And we're starting to talk then, aren't we, about a master race.
Yeah, well, eugenics originated the movement here in this country, New York. And then it moved into Nazi Germany and stuff. So that's one of their underlying big movements in the world. It's a purification of the race, and all that other stuff is what they've been preaching. And the African thing is a target. They want to eliminate the blacks in Africa. That's what they're about right now.
Well, I can remember, is it Horowitz's book about AIDS and Ebola being man-made?
Exactly. They imported that stuff into Africa to reduce the African population. That's what I found out.
Yeah, so fascinating
that's
stuff.
part of the big plan, see.
One bit of good news, though, this week is we had the BBC World Service doing a fascinating report on Iran, where they pointed out that the US, I think it's Brian, I can't remember his second name. Anyway, he's Pompeo's advisor on Iran. And he was saying that, there's a lot of disinformation. We are not stopping medical supplies, blah, blah, to Iran. We're not stopping any aid for, humanitarian aid, that kind of thing. And the BBC blew it out of the water, George. Absolutely rubbish. They rubbished it. They were saying, look, this is complete nonsense. And they had an interview with the Norwegian Refugee Council who said, well, we can't get any money to Iran, which effectively means we can't work there. We can't. The people that I've been employing there are having to leave. So they are sanctioning that sort of thing. The other thing is, of course, they're not being able to get medical supplies in because none of the banks, and this is the banksters at work again, will deal with Iran. European banks won't because they're afraid, apparently, of being sanctioned. But actually, of course, they are politically opposed to Iran, because the Iranians have a fair and moral banking system. And the ideology of the Western banking system is utterly opposed to them. For example, they have much more open banking. They don't allow interest to be charged and that sort of thing in Iran. This is the old-fashioned way, the way we used to do it here, actually, under the Christian usury laws. But the banking fraternity is absolutely opposed to the Iranian banking system. And I think that is potentially what is really behind this hatred of Iran. Michael Hudson and others have pointed out, hang on a minute, the United States has pledged, if you don't repay our loans, if you don't behave in the financial manner that we want, then we'll bomb you. And this is exactly the same as the old British Empire used to do back hundreds of years ago, is it would entrap people get them to take out big loans with British banks, and then if those loans weren't paid back, wherever it might be, the Royal Navy would turn up with a few of their frigates on your doorstep and start shelling you from the sea and blowing up your ports so that you couldn't trade anymore until you paid the debt off. So it's a very similar thing the US is trying to do with Iran right now in a more virtual way through the banking system.
Right. Well, that tanker there in Gibraltar has been released. Is that right?
Well, the question that nobody's
Gloria
really
1,
asked.
I think it's called Gloria 1 is the name of the tanker.
It's called Grace 1.
Oh, Grace 1, that's right. Yeah, Grace 1.
It's been released.
Yeah.
Look, George, the guy that had it seized in the first place was in the running to be British Prime Minister Jeremy Hunt, whose father's an admiral, whose cousin, is it, or his wife or someone very closely related to him, is the head of one of the big private medical firms, and he was in charge, Jeremy Hunt, of the National Health Service and our health system in Britain. So he was basically privatising it to his own family. And a brilliant health system we've got, by the way. I have to say, so many people I know, it's basically like one big family, yeah? So everybody in that family loves each other and looks after each other and gives each other the very best possible care they can. And it works extremely well, but people like Hunt are trying to sell it all off to mostly US private healthcare firms and make it so that the poor simply don't get health treatment. At the moment, there's very good treatment for everyone. But look, getting back to the tanker, it's quite interesting because I think Jeremy Hunt did this during the leadership campaign to leave, Boris was the front runner all along, but to leave Boris a poisoned chalice, yeah? So this is him saying, I, Jeremy Hunt, will do anything the Pentagon wants me to do. And that's my, unique selling point. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of people around the world see that, particularly in Israel and the US, and say, right, well, this is the guy for us, let's fund him, let's hope he becomes more powerful in the future. And it's great to see that Boris has taken the bull by the horns, probably some advice from the Foreign Office, and released it. So he's overturned that decision, and effectively it showed the dividing line between Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson in practical terms as the two people who were running to be Tory leaders, one of whom is going to act in the interests of Britain and Gibraltar, hopefully, and the other one who was going to basically be a puppet, Jeremy Hunt, of the United States. So I'm glad to see that Boris has arranged for this tanker to be released.
Yeah, how about Brexit? Can Boris do it in 60 days? That's quite a promise, isn't it?
Well, it's Halloween, George, isn't it? Look,
I mean, that was
dead back to life.
Yeah.
I mean, what is going to happen? I can tell you, many people I've spoken to, independent observers, see this as the biggest problem that the international transatlantic elite have had to face, the Bilderbergers, if you want.
Right.
The Executive Committee of Global Capitalism, can we call them that? These guys, the biggest thing they've ever had to face, it's the biggest kick up the backside, punch in the face. And so quite clearly they're going to be reacting badly to it. They want to see a united Europe. They have done ever since World War II, probably before that, with the Kalergi plan back in the 1920s. And they want to control Europe on a kind of cartel system. In an even more draconian way than I think they've done in the United States. So this is all about centralising power, centralising control, and shutting ordinary people out of any kind of democratic decision-making whatsoever. And so to see Britain start sailing off into the Atlantic, the big downside is we keep hearing American voices on the BBC all the time for the last few months, which is really irritating, because it's, even here in Britain, people as correspondents, why are Americans sitting in the BBC chairs? And of course the public aren't impressed by that. But I think we may well see it actually happen. And then after that, we may also see, some kind of conflagration on the international financial markets. We've already seen, as you mentioned, some warning of that, birth pangs of something horrendous happening on the international financial markets. But don't forget, we're looking at £166 trillion debt overhang, according to Mervyn King. Look that up, and this is money.co.uk, which is part of the Daily Mail empire. That Mervyn King has made absolutely clear we are waiting for another enormous crash. It can happen any time. 166 trillion.
The debt is a big problem, isn't it? Yeah.
Is massive. 166 trillion.
Yeah.
Unbelievable amount of money, and that is unpayable. So at some point it's all going to go bang, says Mervyn King. Now that can happen any time, and it does seem to me as if it could happen sooner rather than later. It may prevent Brexit if it happens beforehand, but another thing that could prevent Brexit, of course, is any kind of conflagration or war of some sort as well. So these people will be looking, I think, at anything, and they don't care about how many people die as a result of it, so long as they hang on to their power, their control of the 900 million people in Europe through Brussels and the EU, George.
Right. That Brussels and that European Union, that's far from being democratic, isn't it? Huh? That's a problem.
Of course it's not. No, it's not at all. I mean, we've just seen a whole load of people put in charge of the European Commission, which runs it.
Exactly.
They're criminals.
Yeah.
I mean, Lagarde is a criminal. She's now in charge of the European Central Bank. So we're basically being run in Europe by organised crime. These are the people in charge. And there's no real accountability at all for these people, and they just tell us what to do. Simple as that. So it is a fascist system, I think, an appointed system of people who are just simply going to run Europe in the interests of big corporations. And, of course, that is effectively a kind of law of the jungle where the poor, anyone that's got their own ideas, that's outside of the control system of the monopolies, and the oligopolies that control all the industries in a cartel system, anybody outside that is not going to get a look in at all. So even if you're a genius, say, car maker or something like that, you've got some great ideas, your ideas are never going to be realised for yourself. They might be stolen and taken by another massive cartel firm, but there's no free market at all in that world, George.
Yeah, in fact, our patent office can take a patent up if it has national security implications and give you just a pittance, see. So that's the way that works, But yeah, it's a money-based system, and it's a monopoly of money creation that dominates. And that's what kind of system they built. Huh?
What we're looking at really, I think, is the difference between corporate or elected governments. And the corporate government has been taking over for the last 30 or 40 years. In a similar way, the philosophy behind it all is a social Darwinist philosophy versus a Christian philosophy. And the social Darwinists are winning, which is basically the idea that the strong crush the weak with the boot and the tough survive. And they are the ones who are going to be in charge. And that is just, there's no morals to that whatsoever, George. That's the problem. Anyway, my show is on every Friday. Okay. In British summertime we're on at the moment. That's from 6 till 8 p.m. We had the Lord Mayor of Bristol on yesterday. And we had a whole programme all about financial fraud, financial scams. And fantastic guest, I have to say that, don't I? His name is Rowan Bosworth Davis. He's a former Metropolitan Police Fraud Squad officer, and he took us through all of the scams that are involved in the way that crime is investigated now, being outsourced to private businesses that have got no interest in solving the crime. In fact, they've got more interest in helping the criminals. But anyway, it's fascinating to hear from him. And if you want to pick that up online, obviously, in Austin, it's not so easy to pick up FM from Bristol in the UK, unless you've got some weird atmospherics. Then you have to pick us up on thisweek.org.uk, George.
Yeah, I'll make a hypertext link up like I always do there, Tony. And they'll be able to come in and listen to your show.
We have a program during the week which is may be of interest to some of your listeners, which is I've been looking over the last few weeks at things like engineering and manufacturing, and speaking to some people who were working in aerospace engineering in Bristol, in Filton, during the 1960s and 70s, and also had a terrific interview on our dialect show at dialectradio.co.uk. With Anton Chaikin, who was taking us through some of the reasons why Britain and America have been so deindustrialized over the last 30 or 40 years. So we do a kind of that as well. My most recent program on the dialects during the week was all about the Freemasons.
Okay.
And it's a documentary into the spiritual aspects of the Freemasons, the practical aspects, giving a fair hearing to both sides, so critical of Freemasonry and the Freemasons themselves. And also, one of the most fascinating people is a guy called Ian Mattison on there, who's a former senior Freemason himself who came out of Freemasonry, and is much more able, I think, to speak about what is the Freemasonry really all about. You know, what goes on in there, and what are the myths and what are not the myths. And he's a former major in the British Army, now retired, and he's, you know, fascinating guy to hear him taking us through, doing basically a review of the Freemasons talking about themselves, and then he explains what he really thinks about it. So you're getting a really terrific insight on both of these programs, I hope, George, and that's what I do try and do. You know, the BBC do it occasionally, we do it every single week.
Okay, well, thank you, Tony, for being with us this evening. We certainly appreciate all your insights and your excellent news and insights and opinions. Okay?
Okay, George, God bless to you and yours and all your listeners.
Bless you too. Good night.